I always envisioned a dramatic revelation, a movie-like moment for uncovering my wife's infidelity, but reality delivered a painfully ordinary discovery. I truly wish I could recount a more elaborate or distinct narrative about how I learned my spouse was unfaithful, but it unfolded precisely like a cheap plotline from a poorly written book. My job is at an automotive component manufacturing plant, specifically producing braking systems. It isn't glamorous employment, yet it provides for my family. I consider myself fortunate. For 8 hours daily, from 4 in the afternoon until midnight, 5 days each week, I operate an antique piece of machinery. I'm always equipped with safety gear, eye protection, earplugs, steel-toed boots, and a heavy denim apron. I consistently meet my production quota, and if circumstances align, I might receive an annual bonus. I own a comfortable 3-bedroom home, have a wonderful wife, and 2 sons attending elementary school. After 12 years of matrimony, our life appeared quite stable. Until today. Our facility has 5 workstations dedicated to assembling brake shoes, all powered by a compressed air system. In the 8 years I've been employed here, we've never encountered any equipment malfunctions. However, today, midway through my shift, the compressed air mechanism failed. The air must be completely dry to function correctly, filtered and dehumidified by automated apparatus. But this day, it simply didn't work. The dehydrator system neglected to expel the accumulated moisture as it should have. I'm no specialist, but I understand that when water vapor combines with high-pressure air, everything freezes, bringing operations to a halt. Instead of waiting around for repairs, management sent us all home without compensation. Quite ironically, my entire existence was unexpectedly disrupted by high humidity. Upon entering our bedroom, I witnessed a scene, a distinct head of hair moving rhythmically atop my wife, Marcy. Automatically, I activated the overhead light, realizing that Marcy was wide awake. She expressed irritation at my unexpected presence, demanding to know why I was there. I anticipated a reaction of fear, an apology, or perhaps shame from her, but instead, she seemed utterly enraged. I questioned her anger, to which she responded by accusing me of full awareness of the situation. She voiced regret that I had to witness such an event, but then blamed me for not arriving home at my usual time. According to her, if I had been punctual, the other individual wouldn't have been present and she wouldn't have been discovered. The man, previously hidden by the bed, now turned to glare at me, a smirk playing on his lips. Marcy feebly pulled the bedclothes higher for modesty. My error was reaching for him as he began to get off the bed. He appeared significantly larger, standing up than he had lying down. For my efforts, I received 2 incredibly forceful blows to my ribs. I never managed to land a single punch before I found myself on the floor, struggling desperately for breath. I believe I was struck hard on the side of my head, and that is the last thing I recall. I regained consciousness in the hospital emergency room, my ribs being bandaged by a medical assistant. Marcy sat nearby, looking utterly disgusted. The technician completed their work and departed the room. "Marcy, who was that man? And why was he inside our residence?" I asked. "His name's Tony. He's a friend I invited over," she replied. "You were with him, in our bed?" "Our children were sleeping down the hall," I exclaimed. "Yes, I know. If you hadn't caused such a commotion, they wouldn't have woken up. I had to get my sister to watch them so I could bring you here," she stated. "What was he doing here?" I pressed. "How many more times will you ask?" "Tony and I have been seeing each other for roughly 6 months. We were attempting to keep it a secret from you. We don't typically meet here, but I couldn't arrange a babysitter," she explained. "Is it finished now?" I inquired. "No, it's not, Danny. You're a good father and spouse, but Tony is exceptional in bed. I don't see why we should end it simply because you found out, but I guarantee we won't meet here again. It's not fair to you or the boys. I'm truly sorry." "Marcy, that is completely unacceptable. This ends now," I declared. "Danny, if you attempt to interfere with my connection to Tony, you will deeply regret it. He can easily overpower you, and he will do so again if you cause any trouble. Everyone will learn you're a failure. Our friends, family, even your colleagues. Your existence will become a nightmare. Don't you care what anyone thinks? Would you stoop so low just to harm me?" she challenged. "If I must, but I doubt you'll take that risk. Tony believes you're a loser, and I agree. You'll simply have to accept it, Danny boy." "Who is he anyway? Where does he work?" I asked. He doesn't work. He owns Continental Classics, the luxury car dealership on Lancaster Pike. You know, the one you always wished to visit but never did. He's wealthier, more intelligent, and better in bed than you. He's also stronger and more skilled with his fists. Why don't you marry him if he's so incredible? I retorted. That's why I keep you, darling. Tony doesn't desire children, and I won't abandon mine. You'll play the role of the family man while he receives my affection. You either accept it, or everyone will discover what a complete loser you are. Oh, and by the way, I'm relocating your belongings to the guest room. There's no need to share a bed now that everything is out in the open. Who cared for the kids when you were with Tony? I inquired. Usually Karen, sometimes your parents. Speaking of which, Karen introduced me to Tony. I'll express my gratitude to her later. I was discharged the following morning. Marcy was nowhere to be found. I considered contacting someone for a ride or taking a taxi. The taxi won. With the boys at school and Marcy absent from home, all my garments and personal effects were neatly piled on the guest bed. I anticipated that Todd and Terry might have questions about the unfolding situation, but I decided to let Marcy address it. Arranging my new living quarters required less than an hour. Various thoughts raced through my mind. However, there was absolutely no way I was going to allow events to proceed according to Marcy's intentions. My initial action was to retrieve my old phone recording device from the basement. Although it only operated with the landline, it was my sole available option. Marcy primarily used her mobile phone for conversations. Setting it up and concealing it behind some old paint cans took approximately 20 minutes. It was a starting point. Feeling terrible, I still managed to gather enough resolve to return to work. They offered me pain medication, but I hesitated to take them and then operate heavy machinery, opting instead for a couple of strong Tylenols, which seemed like a more sensible choice. Marcy had seriously misjudged my relationships with my colleagues. I disclosed every detail of what had transpired the previous evening to them. They all brainstormed ideas, some more practical than others. It was deeply reassuring to know my friends supported me. With an 8-hour shift ahead, each of us planned to devise strategies to rectify the situation during our mid-shift supper break. Glenn spoke up first. Any thoughts? I don't have one myself, but I have a cousin who works for DeMarco. He handles vehicle detailing and despises him. He could provide inside information on the business buildings or work schedules, Glenn shared. That would be very useful, Glenn. Anyone else? I asked. Danny, Barry offered. I possess 2 long guns and 2 handguns. You're welcome to any of them. None are registered, so there are no legal concerns there. Thanks, Barry. But that's a bit more extreme than what I'm considering, I replied. Don't you even want to hear my idea? Freddie interjected, followed by some laughter. Tell us, Freddie. Come on, the group urged. I thought we could secure him to a tree, legs spread, and construct a bonfire, Indian style, between his legs. Although Freddie's suggestion was well received for its creativity, it was unanimously rejected. Kyle, who hadn't contributed yet, faced everyone's expectant gazes during lunch. What? Don't look at me like that. Yes, I have an idea, but it's a bit unconventional. Go on, Kyle, I encouraged. I recall reading about a correctional facility in Arizona that forced individuals convicted of sexual offenses to wear pink jumpsuits to humiliate them. I know Tony isn't a sex offender, but something similar could embarrass him. You mean put him in a pink jumpsuit? Wouldn't he just remove it? I questioned. I was thinking if we could get to him, bind him, and then completely spray paint him pink. That might accomplish the trick. But he'd know who did it, someone pointed out. You'd have to incapacitate him first, then leave him tied to the chair until he's discovered. Do we use sedatives or just strike him? What's your strategy? I asked. I can obtain a taser. All you have to do is approach stealthily and shock him, Kyle responded. You're making it sound simpler than it likely is. How do we catch him alone, and how do we approach without him noticing? I challenged. I don't have all the answers. It was just an idea, Kyle admitted. The buzzer signaled another 4 hours on the machines. My quota was lagging, so the other men pitched in to assist. Marcy was already in bed when I returned home, upholding her pledge not to bring him into the house. I had no clear idea what to do. Most of the suggestions from the guys resembled high school pranks. I might as well leave a flaming bag of canine excrement on his doorstep. I required genuine retribution. At noon, I rose with the children already at school and Marcy moving about. I showered, shaved, and prepared to leave. Good morning, husband. No kiss? She smirked by the sink. Ignoring her, I left. Her comment didn't warrant a response. I needed lunch and some solitary time. The afternoon was spent occupying myself, contemplating how to retaliate against my wife's paramour without inciting further problems. Work awaited, and I needed to prepare. I decided to stop eating meals at home, the only time I shared with my sons, but I couldn't stomach Marcy's cooking. Before I knew it, it was time for work. Things proceeded normally until the supper break, when Carl proudly announced he had a taser in his vehicle for personal defense. He reminded me not to forget to retrieve it and inquired if I had ever used one. I replied that I hadn't, but they could try it out, eliciting groans from the others at the table. Despite the lack of fresh ideas, they all displayed their support for me, which made me feel better, knowing I had allies at home. The routine was ordinary, although working the graveyard shift had disrupted sleep patterns. Todd and Terry, up earlier than usual, suggested visiting Chuck E. Cheese, which Marcy didn't object to, since they'd be occupied all day. Marcy then informed me that I would need to take a few vacation days as Tony's friend, Wally, would be visiting from Detroit next week, and they planned to embark on a cruise to Cancun. She suggested that if I couldn't secure the time off, I should ask my parents. I expressed skepticism about Marcy's plans, questioning her intention to go on a sea voyage with two men. Marcy defended herself, asserting it wasn't as questionable as I implied, and explained that Wally would be sharing a room with Karen, who had been his friend for years. I responded sarcastically, acknowledging that it sounded just dandy. I made a mental note to thank Karen later. Despite being awake early, it seemed like it would be a long day. To pass the time before Chuck E. Cheese opened, we visited the nearby Hobby Lobby. The boys were old enough to assemble most of the plastic models there. The final products weren't impressive, but they thoroughly enjoyed themselves. I allowed them to explore while I admired the crafts available for creative homemakers. If Marcy had been interested in hobbies, perhaps she wouldn't have brought home that hairy brute. Too late now. I was delighted to discover rows of specialized paints and spray cans there. And there they were. 6 beautiful pink cans. They didn't contain as much product as those at Lowe's or Home Depot, but they were unmistakably pink. It was the only place I had seen paint of that specific color in a spray can. I interpreted it as a sign and purchased all 6. Todd selected a monster truck kit, and Terry chose a tugboat. Plastic tugboat models were a novelty to me. Before departing, I picked up a package of 10 large plastic cable ties, each about 18 inches long. They appeared sufficiently sturdy. Chuck E. Cheese was ready by then. The kids spent approximately 4 hours and consumed 2 pizzas there before growing weary. We fed ducks in the park with inexpensive bread before heading to my parents' house. They were pleased to have us for supper and the evening. Todd and Terry watched television for most of the night, while I briefed my father on the situation with Marcy. I realized I was informing people about it before Marcy could. Her threat seemed less impactful. Dad promised to care for the boys, which eased my mind. Around 9 o'clock, I contacted Marcy to inform her we'd be staying at my parents' house. I got her answering machine. After a large breakfast at IHOP, we found Marcy still in bed. I began mowing the lawn while the boys worked on their models. Even though it was a beautiful day outside, I let them continue. I decided to dedicate the entire day to yard work, including edging and pruning. Tasks didn't progress as quickly as usual because I found myself engaging in numerous conversations. I possessed my own hedge clippers, but borrowed a set from Mike Fielding across the street. His wife, Mary, adored gossip. I cautioned Mike about unfamiliar vehicles at our residence, explaining that Marcy might entertain male acquaintances, and if they became unruly, he should call the police. It was challenging for me to manage things since I worked nights. Larry Finley from the local church board lent me a spark plug wrench. I apologized for Marcy's recent conduct. Of course, he was inquisitive about what I meant. Larry was even more of a gossip than Mary Fielding. In just 10 minutes, he had sufficient material to last a month. I skipped lunch and concluded my yard work around 4 in the afternoon. After a quick shower, I proceeded to Rosie's Cantina and treated myself to the most expensive dish on the menu. I'm not entirely certain what it was, but it tasted delicious. I spent the evening with my brother Dave and his family. Dad had already updated him on the situation. I slept on his sofa for the night. My wife had formulated an elaborate scheme. She intended to compel my compliance by threatening to expose me as a cuckolded man if I didn't sanction and support her infidelity. She vowed to make my existence miserable. It was an intriguing strategy, but it contained numerous flaws. In less than a week, I had already divulged the details to everyone, which effectively nullified her threat. I also managed to portray her as cheap, more effectively than she could have imagined. I don't believe she foresaw any negative repercussions. The next afternoon, when I stopped by the house to change for work, Marcy was waiting for me, visibly distressed. She mentioned that Karen had informed her about rumors circulating among the neighbors that she was operating a brothel at night. I calmly reassured her that I had merely told the neighbors she might have male visitors while I was at work and advised them not to be concerned. However, Marcy insisted that the rumors were spreading differently and asked who else I had spoken to. I admitted that I had spoken to everyone, thinking it would be simpler that way. I hadn't mentioned anything to her parents or sisters and suggested she handle that before they heard the gossip. Marcy expressed frustration, feeling that the rumors were making her look bad. In response, I pointed out that the situation wasn't fair to me either, as it made me appear like a betrayed husband. Marcy apologized but said she had to leave for work. She mentioned that she had managed to spend some time with the boys before departing, though it wasn't the quality time she had hoped for. Glenn had some excellent news that night. Continental Classics closed at 9 o'clock on Thursday evening, allowing Tony to personally manage all paychecks for Friday. He disliked being interrupted while processing payroll, so even the cleaning crew was absent. Kyle took a few minutes to demonstrate how to operate the taser. No one volunteered to test it. The plan was progressing smoothly. If I were apprehended, which I fully anticipated, I would likely face incarceration. I didn't care. Tony DeMarco needed to be publicly shamed. If I were arrested, I would ensure all newspapers and television stations received the complete story. Any such publicity would devastate him or, at the very least, provoke him enough to make a critical error. For the next few days, I only returned home to sleep, shower, and change clothes. I hadn't eaten a single meal at home since that initial day. Finally, Thursday arrived. I arranged for my truck to have a dead battery, so Kyle picked me up. The floor supervisor rarely bothered the brake department too much. As long as we met our quotas and maintained quality, they left us alone. The OSHA regulations for the job would work in my favor. With our aprons, gloves, and welding goggles, we all looked quite similar. At 8:30, I slipped out the back door. The other men would take turns covering for me at my station. One of their posts would be empty, but no one truly cared. Restroom breaks were normal and unregulated. The main objective was to create the impression that I never departed. I entered the staff entrance at Continental Classics and proceeded directly to the restroom. Around 9 o'clock, someone quickly checked the area before turning off the lights. 10 minutes later, I put on latex gloves and exited the restroom into a dimly lit office area. Tony's desk overlooked the showroom, so his back was turned towards the door. It seemed simpler than I had expected. Despite having a computer in front of him, he was using an old adding machine with paper tape. He didn't hear my approach. I discharged the taser into Tony's neck from behind. His body stiffened upright, and fearing he might turn around, I administered another shock. This time, he twitched slightly before relaxing. Perfect. I secured 2 plastic cable ties on each of his limbs and brought along an old necktie to use as a blindfold. He offered no resistance. I rolled his chair to the showroom window. He would be perfectly visible when his employees arrived for work in the morning. The paint, a pleasant pink hue, required more coats than anticipated. It was rapidly absorbed into his attire, necessitating at least 3 applications in each area to achieve the desired effect. I had just enough paint, but barely. He looked quite striking in pink. After completing the task, I carefully repacked everything. I had expected Tony to awaken during the process, but he remained motionless. I had also planned to remove the necktie blindfold before leaving. I checked my watch multiple times, well within the time frame I had set, but I still wanted Tony to be conscious before I departed. 5 minutes later, I began to worry. I attempted to feel for a pulse without success. Perhaps the latex gloves hindered my sensitivity. I removed one glove and tried again, but still no pulse. Trying to locate a pulse on his neck, like on television, yielded nothing. I removed the blindfold and touched his eyeball with a pencil tip, no blink, no reflex. Needless to say, panic set in. I regained my composure, put the latex glove back on, and wiped everything I might have touched. I pocketed the necktie and cut off all the plastic ties. Removing them revealed marks from the pink paint, which looked peculiar. The white skin under the necktie made him resemble a pink raccoon. After ensuring I hadn't overlooked anything, I left for work. On the way back to the shop, I disposed of all items, including the taser, in a storm drain. 10 minutes later, I was back at work, producing brake shoes. No one noticed my absence. After the shift concluded, I informed the guys of what had transpired. They were all complicit, so I was confident nobody would speak up. Freddie was impressed, and none of them seemed concerned. Kyle drove me home, and we both noted the time of his drop-off. I didn't manage to sleep as long as usual. Around 10 o'clock, Marcy burst into my room. "What on earth did you do? What did you do, you little idiot?" she shrieked. Naturally, I simply rolled over and gave her a puzzled expression. "What in the world are you talking about, woman?" I asked. "Tony's dead." Karen called and said they discovered him in his office this morning dead. "I suspect you had something to do with it, and I'll ensure you pay, you idiot." That was the second time she had called me an idiot in 5 minutes. It was quite clear I wouldn't be getting any more sleep, so I stumbled out of bed and went to the bathroom, not eager to face Marcy's fury. I took a long, hot shower and shaved slowly. I even applied a bit of aftershave, just to annoy my dear wife. I never made it to the coffee pot. A tall man stood in the living room, conversing with Marcy. His hair was closely cropped, and he wore a dark suit. The witch had summoned the police, no doubt about it. I shook my head and headed into the kitchen for my first cup of the day. Marcy wore a sarcastic smirk as I settled into my favorite recliner. My uninvited guest followed suit. "Mr. Mercer, I'm Detective Darnell Green, with an E. I'm here regarding the demise of Anthony DeMarco last night. Your wife mentioned you and Mr. DeMarco had a disagreement last week, and I was wondering if I could ask you a few questions." "Certainly no objections, but not here," I stated. "What do you mean?" he asked. "If you wish to speak, let's do it in your office, not in my residence. Is that acceptable to you?" I couldn't help but notice the frown on Marcy's face. I was fairly certain she had expected to be part of the discussion. "Your vehicle or mine, Mr. Mercer? I have a few other matters to attend to, so I'll meet you there." "Any particular office?" "Second floor, rear, room 26. Just turn right when you exit the elevator." "I'll see you shortly." Marcy was furious as I put on my shoes. I never got around to finishing the coffee, so I poured it down the sink. I turned and smiled as I walked out the door. "I guess you'll receive what you desired, sweetheart." "What are you talking about?" "What do you mean, Danny?" she demanded. 10 minutes later, I was seated with Detective Green on the second floor of the municipal building. For the next hour, Detective Green posed all the relevant questions, and I provided suitable responses. He delicately introduced the topic of the affair without dwelling on it or being overly direct. Naturally, I had to acknowledge possessing a motive, but I insisted I never had the chance to act on it. It was a serious matter, but I endeavored to be cooperative without being disrespectful. I believe he appreciated my efforts to simplify his job, even though I couldn't offer a definitive answer. The most fascinating part of the conversation was learning that Tony had passed away due to a cardiac issue. He had received a pacemaker a couple of years prior, which apparently didn't interact well with the taser. They inferred the taser's involvement from the marks on his neck. I felt regretful about Tony's death, yet there was also a profound sense of relief. Detective Green gave me the customary "don't leave town" warning and mentioned he'd contact me after confirming my alibi. It was unexpected. I never imagined needing an alibi for anything. It was kind of thrilling. We departed on good terms, and I sensed that Darnell Green was supportive, which was comforting. After grabbing a quick meal, I tuned into the television news. There was a segment about the passing of a local businessman, noting he had no relatives in the area. I withdrew funds from the bank accounts and then treated myself to a pleasant breakfast. There were tasks to attend to at home. Marcy wasn't present when I returned. It took me half an hour to relocate all my belongings to the master bedroom and hers to the guest room. The guest room had limited storage space, so I piled her items on the bed for her to organize. I checked the telephone recorder in the basement, finding nothing significant. I gathered banking, insurance records, and other crucial documents. Thankfully, Marcy's Volvo was registered in my name, simplifying matters. I stashed everything in a folder under the front seat of my truck. I called work and took a 2-week vacation. A few hours later, my beloved wife arrived. She seemed taken aback to find me at home. It was time to clarify things again. I grinned as I escorted her to the guest room. "What is this? Who do you think you are?" Her response was a sarcastic smirk. "Tell me, damn it! What's happening?" "Marcy, I'll be utilizing the master bedroom from now on. You can have the guest room. I suggest you begin putting away your clothes. Anything left out by dinner will be discarded. Any questions? I can't fit my things in that tiny closet, and I won't stay in that room anyway. What do you mean, disposed of? If it doesn't fit in the closet or dresser, you don't require it. This is non-negotiable. Danny, you're in trouble. Get your act together. If you need clarification, ask later, idiot. That was the third time that day she had called me an idiot. I must be making some progress. While Marcy was occupied in the guest room, I emptied her purse on the kitchen table. I meticulously collected what I desired. First, I took her cell phone and car keys from her wallet. I removed her driver's license, credit cards, debit cards, and cash. I replaced the remaining items. I retrieved her car title from the pickup and drove her Volvo to a friend who owned a car lot across town. I sold it to him outright at a fair price, with the understanding he'd sell it wholesale out of town. Even after settling the loan, I pocketed a few thousand. As I headed into Taco Bell for lunch, my cell phone rang. You witch! Where's my cell phone, and where's my car? I was relieved she didn't call me a jerk this time. She was calling from the house phone. It was a good test. I could check the recorder later. I'm sorry, honey. I had to get money to hire a lawyer for the homicide charges. I promised to get you another car once I'm out of jail, I said, ending the call and turning off the cell phone. After that conversation, I realized securing legal representation was crucial. No matter what happened, I was determined not to remain married, but I had to wait. I was next in line to order. Todd and Terry were home when I arrived. I went straight to my sons, ignoring Marcy. I did glance her way a few times and noticed she wasn't pleased. The boys eagerly showed me their models. When Marcy began preparing dinner, I wandered to the guest room. My clothes were back on the bed. Marcy's in the master bedroom. I chuckled but chose not to argue. She seemed stubborn and resolute. Marcy instructed the boys to wash up for dinner, and I returned to the guest room to unpack. I would have loved to discard her belongings, but that seemed too childish. Red Lobster was my treat tonight. Money wasn't an issue. I still had cash after the lawyer's retainer. The shrimp and lobster combination was delicious, but the cheese rolls remained my favorite. After finishing, I switched on my cell phone, hoping for a call from work or Detective Green. The first call I received was from my wife, who asked how she could get to the grocery store to pick up some items, including milk. I assured her that I would take her when I returned and suggested planning our shopping trips for Saturdays when I was off work. I expressed a preference for her not to go alone and mentioned another call coming in, prompting me to end our conversation with plans to talk later. The second call was from Kyle, who informed me that Detective Green had spoken to the entire crew individually and as a group, and everyone's accounts had aligned. He mentioned that Tom Tingle, the floor manager, had strongly supported him, emphasizing that Kyle couldn't have missed work after arriving home. Just in time to tuck the boys in, I found Marcy sitting on the couch with wine. I grabbed a cold Foster's and settled into my recliner, hoping to initiate a conversation. I asked Marcy about her intention to portray me as a villain, which abruptly ended the discussion. Marcy finished her wine, left for her bedroom, and I realized she didn't actually desire to communicate. Disappointed, I grabbed my beer and checked the recorder. The first call was to her sister, no cover-up there. It seemed Marge knew about the affair with Tony and supported Marcy. That was reassuring. The next call, to Marcy's mother, was different. Mom was completely unaware. Her daughter convinced her that Tony was a friend of Karen's, and I was jealous because I'd been pursuing Karen for years. Although she didn't directly accuse me of homicide, it was heavily implied. She contacted the cell phone provider to inquire about a replacement for the phone I took but had no success. Then she reached out to the DMV to report the loss of her driver's license, and they advised her to inform the police. When she called the bank to request a new credit card, she discovered the account was closed. I'll give her credit. She was quite active. The final call on the machine was to Karen. Even though Karen lived nearby, they opted for a phone conversation instead of meeting in person. It worked out in my favor, of course. From that call, I gathered two important details. Wally was still arriving from Detroit, and Marcy planned to maintain a low profile until his presence. The next day, the boys and I were up early and out of the house before Marcy awoke. We returned home after lunch, and Marcy insisted I drive her to the grocery store since she lacked a car and driver's license. That evening, while she prepared dinner, I checked the recorder. Wally had arrived and immediately contacted Marcy. Their conversation was captivating. He believed Marcy's narrative and vowed vengeance. Wally and Tony were childhood friends, and he was resolute about seeking justice. He provided Marcy with his contact information and instructed her to call him the following day. Afterward, Marcy excitedly phoned Karen, expressing her happiness. It was hard to believe this was the same woman I'd been married to for years. The transformation was sudden and complete. I never imagined my actions, aside from confronting her lover, warranted such a drastic alteration. Before turning in, I grabbed a burger, knowing the lawn needed mowing again. I used it as an excuse to avoid Marcy. The next day, around 11 o'clock, Marcy's parents arrived to pick up the boys for an unplanned sleepover, but I didn't object. Grandma Wilcox assured they'd be back in time for school tomorrow. Eager to check the phone recorder, I postponed it until after lunch since I skipped breakfast. Following a quick shower, I headed to Denny's. Marcy made no mention of my absence from home. She and Wally had devised a plan to avenge Tony's passing, which seemed somewhat absurd to me given my knowledge of the situation. Their plan involved Wally entering the house through the back deck sliding door, while Marcy assured him it would be unlocked. If all went well, it was meant to appear as a burglary gone wrong, with me being shot. Both Marcy and Karen were to call emergency services upon hearing the gunshot. At that moment, I realized I hadn't updated my insurance policy beneficiaries. As I left, I sarcastically blew a kiss to my wife, receiving a middle finger in return. I had dinner with my parents and stayed the evening. Before leaving, I borrowed my dad's snake charmer, a short-barreled 20-gauge shotgun, for the upcoming event. Marcy was in bed when I returned home, her light on, presumably reading. The lone message on the answering machine came from Karen, boasting about her and Wally's pleasurable afternoon before signing off. She assured Marcy of readiness later that night. It took me roughly 20 minutes to swap out the buckshot and the shells with rock salt, using a leftover bag from last winter. My intention wasn't to eliminate Wally, but merely to impede him. Honestly, I didn't wish harm upon Tony either. I hoped Wally didn't have a bad heart like Tony did. Wanting to check the back deck door, I hesitated, fearing Wally might spot me. I had to assume Marcy left it unlocked. I stripped down to my shorts and mussed up the bed blankets. A cup of coffee would have been preferable, but since none was available, I settled for a drink. I waited in my recliner with the cell phone close by. He didn't arrive until after midnight. Upon spotting him on the deck, I promptly dialed emergency services, reporting an intruder in my house and expressing fear for my life. Keeping the line open, the patio door slid open quietly, revealing Wally. I waited until he was fully inside the house before delivering the first blast. I aimed for his lower body to avoid accidental fatality. The first shot knocked him back under the deck. With the second shot, he tumbled over the deck side, breaking the railing. I knew I hadn't killed him as he howled in pain. Man, that rock salt must have caused quite a sting. I was amazed at how deafening the shotgun blast sounded indoors. My ears were ringing intensely. When I flipped on the lights, Marcy was already in the living room, screaming. Although she was shouting at me, her words were incomprehensible. I approached to check on Wally and noticed a Ruger .22 automatic pistol with a silencer on the floor. Marcy continued to scream, so I aimed the shotgun in her direction, causing her to quickly quiet down and flee the room. It appeared Wally had broken his ankle in the fall. Some guys seemed to have all the luck. 10 minutes later, the first police car arrived. There wasn't much discussion. I placed the shotgun on the floor to avoid any confusion about the situation. Pointing to the phone, I informed the officers that everything was under control. When asked about other occupants, I mentioned Marcy in the bedroom. Bringing her into the living room, the officers realized their mistake. Despite their attempts to quiet her, both Marcy and I were unsuccessful. Finally, a large female officer gently escorted her outside. I noticed Karen standing with some neighbors outside. I grinned at her and gestured across my throat, but she quickly walked away without returning the gesture. The EMTs arrived for Wally as Detective Green showed up. He smiled at me, and I couldn't help but grin back. It was an intentional cheekiness, but I couldn't resist. The female officer escorted Marcy back inside so she could dress. After getting dressed, we all headed to the police headquarters. I requested separate cars, and Detective Green agreed to let me ride with him. We didn't speak on the way downtown, but he smiled at me again. It was daylight when Green released me. Although we only spoke for about 30 minutes, they kept me at the station all night, making me drink coffee. One of the police cars drove me home. I was disappointed not to see yellow tape around the house. Everything looked normal, and even the rock salt hadn't damaged the glass door. Wally seemed to have borne the brunt of it. I estimated it would take about an hour to fix the broken railing. I went to bed and didn't wake up until after lunch. After relieving myself, I stumbled into the kitchen to find my amiable detective seated at the table, engrossed in the newspaper and sipping fresh coffee, which I presumed he had brewed while I slept. Having had my fill of coffee the night before, I opted for a tall glass of orange juice and settled across from him. How he entered the house eluded me. "You're quite the composed individual, Mr. Mercer," he remarked, his eyes fixed on the paper. Uncertain how to reply, I remained silent, unsure if he was teasing me. Finishing his coffee, he finally spoke. "Detective Green, I need a shower, a shave, and some lunch. I'll treat, unless it violates some police protocol." "Take your time, Danny. I've got all day." Heading to the shower, I pondered when he found time to sleep. Lunch comprised 2 hefty pulled pork sandwiches, and Green even joined me in washing them down with a beer. As the silence grew palpable, he broke it. "You were eager to ask me questions, weren't you, Mr. Mercer?" "Funny, I had the same thought about you," I retorted. Green flagged down the waiter for 2 more drafts. "I spent the entire night questioning you. Now it's your turn." "All right, first off, where's my wife?" "She's still in custody. Charges will be filed this afternoon." Downing my beer, I processed the unexpected news. I had a flood of inquiries, but delving deeper risked exposing myself. Opting for caution, I remarked, "Nice to see Marcy's folks rallying for her, as I won't be." "No more questions, Detective Green, but if you need to share, go ahead." He chuckled, taking a swig. "One more thing. Did you happen to overhear or record any conversations between your wife and Mr. Williams?" "You mean Wally?" That earned me a smirk. "If I did have such a recording, would you want it?" "I'm unsure if things unfold as I anticipate. It may not matter. But if they secure skilled lawyers, having such evidence could be problematic, right?" "You're onto something. I'm just trying to streamline my job. I'll manage without a hypothetical tape." I nodded slightly. "Thanks, Danny boy. I think I should drive you home. Your boys will return from school soon, needing their father." We reached the house just as Todd and Terry disembarked from the school bus. They approached us, and I introduced them to my new detective companion. Eager to see his badge, they expressed interest. However, the mood shifted when Green inquired, "So, who built the tugboat and who assembled the monster truck?" "I built the truck," Todd exclaimed proudly, while Terry declared, "I did the tugboat. Want to see it?" With a promise of possibly inspecting them another time, Terry departed, leaving me stunned. As Green walked to his car with a satisfied grin, he knew about the pink paint predicament, holding the upper hand. Helpless, we ordered pizza for dinner, and the boys didn't inquire about their mom's whereabouts. After supper, Marcy's dad called, seeking assistance to raise bail money for her release from jail. Politely declining, I wondered if he truly comprehended the situation, but at least he tried to be a supportive father. Inquiring about her accommodation, he hesitated before stating she would stay with them. We assisted in loading Marcy's belongings into the pickup and dropped them off without issue. Returning home, I noticed a U-Haul truck in Karen's driveway. She had vanished the next morning. Marcy never reached out, leaving me to glean updates from the daily newspaper. I felt deliberately excluded from the unfolding events. There was no trial. Marcy placed all blame on Wally, who claimed it was her idea. Both accepted plea bargains, with Marcy receiving 3 to 5 years for conspiracy to commit homicide and Wally receiving 5 to 10 years for attempted homicide. Federal authorities were consulted regarding Wally's silencer, but postponed action until he completed his initial sentence. Detective Green didn't require the tape and ceased mentioning it. Karen disappeared without a trace. My dad reclaimed his shotgun, jesting that I might need it again. Chuckling, he mentioned Marcy served me with divorce papers once her jail term began. She didn't contest anything. I sensed she wanted nothing to do with me, since I hadn't seen or spoken to her since the night I shot Wally. I sold the house and moved back in with my parents, as I couldn't balance work and caring for the boys alone. My colleagues welcomed me back, and although offered a switch to the day shift, I declined. I regularly took the boys to visit their mother at Mooney Women's Prison. During these visits, I remained in the car, typically for less than an hour, sometimes outdoors in good weather, observing them through the chain-link fence. I refrained from discussing the visits with them and requested they not share any details. It seemed to suit all of us well, and everything seemed to be going smoothly until I received the phone call. "Hello, is this Daniel Mercer?" "Yes, I am. I'm Angela Hawkins. Detective Darnell Green suggested I reach out to you. There are matters we need to discuss." "I'm aware, but why do you want to speak with me?" "Tony DeMarco was my brother." "Oh, damn. Just when I thought I'd put all this behind me. Now this?" "I understand, but I don't think avoiding this conversation is wise. I'm sorry for your loss, but I can't assist you." I ended the call before she could say more. 2 days later, she called again. "Daniel, I'd appreciate it if we could meet. There are things I need to address. Detective Green mentioned you're reasonable. Where should we meet?" "I'd prefer the auto showroom, but anywhere you're comfortable is fine." It took me a moment to respond. "Let's meet Saturday at 10 o'clock at the showroom. I'll bring my sons. They enjoy old cars." Unsure of her intentions, I felt safer in public with the boys. I didn't want to use them as a shield, but I believed she'd be less inclined to cause trouble with them present. I speculated about her potential grudge, assuming she might be Italian and hot-blooded. Eventually, I concluded I was overthinking and needed a beer. I called Detective Green for insight. He chuckled, advising me to meet with her and stop fretting. Easy for him to say, as he wasn't the one who eliminated her brother. Continental Classics was an expansive and impressive establishment. Apart from the main showroom, they possessed 2 sizable buildings in the rear, housing cars awaiting restoration or awaiting display on the showroom floor. It came as a shock when we arrived to find them hosting a grand opening celebration. I hadn't anticipated it. There were many aspects of the event that puzzled me. Terry and Todd appeared torn between the cars and the complimentary items. My first impression was the aroma emanating from the popcorn machine. A man clad in floppy shoes and a rubber nose distributed small bags of freshly popped kernels, while adjacent stood a soda machine and another clown manning a hot dog cart. It seemed the boys wouldn't require lunch today. Angela Hawkins wasn't difficult to identify. The moment I observed her striding purposefully towards me, I recognized her immediately. Everything about her exuded Italian heritage. Dark hair, eyes, olive complexion, and broad hips. While a gentleman might not have noticed the latter, they were accentuated by her stature, barely reaching 5 feet. Tony was colossal, whereas his sister was short and stout. I felt a twinge of anxiety as she approached, then noticed the miniature version of her by her side. A young girl of about 10, bearing a striking resemblance to Angela, albeit with lighter hair and naturally lacking any hips at all. It appeared my hostess employed the same tactic as I did for security, as we both relied on our children. As she closed the distance between us, her hand extended in a friendly gesture. "Daniel Mercer, I presume?" It felt only natural and polite to shake her hand, reminiscent of a scene from a movie about Dr. Livingston. Though she wore a smile, she seemed slightly nervous, which eased my own apprehension. I stood there silently, prompting her to continue speaking. She expressed her intention for both of us to learn the business thoroughly enough to take control, emphasizing the need for me to assert myself in the meantime. Angela admitted that she was a kind person, which led Tony and his wife to attempt to take advantage of her. Her tone became more relaxed as she remarked on the unsuccessful outcome for Tony and his wife. I found her comment oddly amusing and chuckled. Over the next half hour, we discussed the terms of our arrangement. Angela offered better compensation and benefits compared to my factory job, with the option to return if things didn't work out, although I sincerely hoped they would. Todd looked unwell on the way home, likely from too many hot dogs and sodas. Meanwhile, Terry seemed to enjoy himself chatting with Carla, more than inspecting cars, a positive sign. Todd became sick in the truck and skipped supper. I started work the following Monday. Things unfolded as Angela predicted. I quickly familiarized myself with the operation and gained support from employees, particularly Glenn's cousin, my staunchest ally. Most wanted the business to thrive and readily reported any misconduct. Angela delegated firings to me, a task I surprisingly relished. I lived up to my reputation. Detective Green visited for coffee often, though our conversations remained light. Eventually, he shared a personal story. 3 years ago, I was a police officer in Philly. I returned home one day to find my wife in bed with my supervisor. I attacked them and threw my wife out. The department gave me the ultimatum to quit or be fired. A week later, I found work here. Before leaving, I ensured my wife's lover lost his job. I didn't press for more details. At least now I understood why he seemed to favor my side. The boys agreed not to inform their mother about my new job during visits. They casually mentioned the lengthy drive but understood it was unavoidable. I felt it was crucial for Marcy to see her sons, not for her sake, but to inflict emotional pain. I know it's a terrible way to involve your kids, but I derived some twisted satisfaction from it. Angela and I were spending more time together at and after work. One weekend, the boys insisted on taking her and Carla to Noble's Grove. Mostly, we stayed close to home due to our living situations complicating any romantic prospects. While I was keen on a closer relationship with Angela, it wasn't feasible. I still resided with my parents and the boys, while Angela and Carla shared a small studio apartment. Since the business exceeded expectations, Angela discussed purchasing a house. She spent hours online searching for the perfect one. My first realization came when she mentioned wanting a 4-bedroom home for the boys. Danny, I think it's important for each boy to have their own room. It's better to address this now than later, don't you agree? I recognized the question as a setup and sensed Angela viewed me as more than just an employee. The possibility of romance seemed promising. Yeah, I think that's a great idea. A split-bedroom plan would also be beneficial. I don't like the idea of them being too close to the master bedroom, I added. Before leaving the office, Angela sported a small smile, marking our peculiar relationship. Though we never engaged in intimacy or acts of physical closeness, I felt closer to her than I did to Marcy in 12 years. 2 days after finalizing my divorce from Marcy, we all celebrated at Red Lobster. While the kids were unaware of the reason, Angela knew. Later at the apartment, while the kids watched a pay-per-view movie, Angela kissed me in the kitchen. We hugged and giggled until Carla caught us. Whoops. Sorry, Mom, she said before adding, it's about time. Angela and I behaved ourselves for the remainder of the evening, eagerly anticipating what lay ahead. The following day, while the kids were at school, Angela and I decided to take an extended lunch break and return to the apartment with a sense of pent-up energy. We didn't resume work until just before the end of the workday. As time went on, we continued to take numerous extended lunches, and Angela became increasingly serious about finding a new house. Detective Green would often drop by for casual visits, sometimes admiring the cars. He developed a liking for a Studebaker Hawk previously owned by Roger Ebert, and Angela offered him a good price for it. Unexpectedly, Angela requested that I take her to see Marcy. Despite our reduced number of trips, Marcy didn't seem to object. I asked if there was a specific reason for the visit, to which Angela replied, closure. Although I understood the term, the concept felt somewhat abstract to me. I offered to accompany her, but Angela insisted that I simply drive her there, stating that I didn't need to be present during the conversation. On a warm, sunny fall day, we arrived at Mooney. Since the inmate visits were held outside, I parked by the fence. 10 minutes later, Marcy and Angela emerged into the exercise yard and sat at a table, chatting and smiling as if they were old friends. Things took an unexpected turn after 5 minutes. Marcy's smile vanished, and she leaned across the picnic table, scowling at her visitor. Meanwhile, Angela remained cheerful. Suddenly, Marcy lunged across the table, attempting to grab Angela. The commotion was swiftly quelled by several guards who escorted my ex-wife back into the building, where she protested vehemently. Angela glanced at me, smiled, and shrugged before departing the visitors' area. She was still grinning when she returned to the car. What was that all about? I questioned. Your ex-wife is quite sensitive, Angela remarked with a hint of amusement. After driving for several miles, she turned slightly, straining against the seatbelt. I introduced myself, and she seemed pleased to see me. Everything was fine until she thought I was on her side. I admit, I may have misled her a bit at first. How so? I inquired. I told her I came from Baltimore, seeking revenge. That seemed to satisfy her because she thought I meant against you. Absolutely. What I really meant was that I intended to seek retribution against Tony by assuming control of his business. I suppose you can still seek revenge against a deceased person, right? All right, but what caused her to become so upset? She wanted specifics, like when, where, and how. Naturally, I knew she was referring to you. Now I was becoming intrigued. I informed her that it would take a considerable amount of time and inquired if she wished to be kept updated on the progress. She eagerly consented and insisted on knowing precisely how I planned to accomplish it. When I divulged my strategy, she became furious. She completely lost her composure. It was quite remarkable. All right. How on earth do you plan to eliminate me? No, I genuinely want to know. Her smile widened. I informed her that I intended to exhaust you to death. That's all. Indeed. Isn't it amusing? I thought she might become angry, but I never anticipated her reaction to be so extreme. There was a brief moment of silence. We both sat there, smiling. I felt immensely proud of her. When do you intend to commence this endeavor? As soon as we arrive at the next motel. Silly. 2 months later, Angela and I tied the knot. It was an intimate ceremony in the backyard of our new residence. Angela sent Marcy a wedding invitation along with a brief note. Enclosed, everything is proceeding as planned. You should be deceased in 40 or 50 years.